May in Newport, Oregon still carried the chill of spring in the wind, yet the sunlight was already strong enough to cast a golden sheen over the surface of the sea. The afternoon air held the mingled scents of salt and damp wood from the old shipyard just a few blocks from my house. The familiar sounds of hammers, striking, waves all whining and gulls calling drifted through the air, reminding me of the years I once worked as a traditional boat builder. Now, at 60 years old, widowed, I live alone in a small house by the harbor, quietly watching the rhythm of the town shift with the changing tides. Before I begin my story, I want to ask those of you watching this video, where are you hearing my story from? Leave a comment below. I want to know which corners of the world my journey has reached. 3 days before my daughter Lauren's 35th birthday, I decided to stop by her house. I didn't tell her in advance, thinking the surprise would make her happy, just as it had in previous years. Driving over the Yaquina Bay Bridge, I thought about the apple pie my late wife Evelyn used to make for Lauren's birthday. A golden crust, thin slices of apple, a dusting of cinnamon and nutmeg, its scent filling the kitchen. It was more than food. It was a thread that tied the three of us together through years that seemed simple but were priceless. When I knocked, Mark, Lauren's new boyfriend, opened the door. He smiled politely, but the brief look in his eyes told me I wasn't part of tonight's plans. Lauren stepped out from the kitchen, still holding a wooden spoon, her hair tied neatly at the back. The smell of roasting meat, red wine sauce, and an expensive perfume mingled in the air. On the dining table, a salad bowl was already dressed, and a bottle of red wine was already opened. A carefully prepared evening, but not for me. "What brings you here, Dad?" Lauren asked. Her tone wasn't exactly cold, but it lacked the warmth I had hoped for. I smiled, resting a hand on the back of a chair near the door, keeping my voice light. "I thought this year I could bring your mom's apple pie, the one with the cinnamon filling you always loved. We could have it together like we used to." Lauren was silent for a moment, then set the spoon down. Her eyes drifted toward Mark before returning to me. "Dad, don't come. I'm not expecting you there. I already have plans with Mark's family." The words cut through the air, leaving a heavy emptiness behind. I stood still, as if a cold wave from the Pacific had swept in, drowning every plan and fond memory I had carried with me. I didn't speak right away. My eyes wandered around the living room. Newly laid hardwood floors polished to a shine. I had paid for that upgrade when Lauren complained the old floor looked too dated. The modern stainless steel kitchen, also paid for by me, after Mark had said the old one wasn't suitable for hosting dinner guests. The beige leather sofa set, the walnut dining table, each carried the trace of an invoice with my name on it. Now I was being shut out of the very place I had helped build, like a laborer fired from a project the moment it was complete. Mark stayed quiet, avoiding my eyes. Lauren's tone returned to normal as she added, "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Mark's family has their traditions, and I want to keep things simple." I swallowed, keeping my face calm. "All right, sweetheart." Without another word, I turned toward the door. As my hand closed around the cold metal handle, I felt the chill seep from my palm to my shoulder. Stepping over the threshold, the sea breeze hit my face, carrying the salt and scent of seaweed. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers touching the set of keys to Lauren's house, the ones I had kept since the day I gave her the home. A habit, as if holding them might somehow pull back a little of the family warmth. But now the keys were nothing more than cold metal, unable to open any door that truly belonged to me. I stepped down the front stairs, the sound of waves hitting the breakwater in the distance mingling with the faint jingle of metal in my pocket. Behind me, the voices and laughter from inside continued. A dinner carrying on without a place for me. I opened my truck door and sat behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, I looked one last time through the window. The golden lights spilling from the windows onto the sidewalk shimmered like a scene from a holiday postcard. But to me, it was just light from a house I had bought, paid for, repaired, and upgraded, only to be left outside. The engine rumbled to life, its sound drowning out the waves. I drove slowly down the street toward the main road. The silhouettes of masts and cranes cut against the gray spring sky. The sky looked like a blank canvas waiting to be painted over, and I knew the next part of this painting would not resemble anything I had once imagined. Inside me, another wind was rising, not the ocean wind, but something colder and stronger. The awareness that a new chapter had just begun. And in that chapter, there would be two late-night calls asking Dad to help out a little. No moments of opening my wallet because this month had been hard. It was just me, the road ahead, and a decision still unspoken. But I knew that when the time came, that decision would be carried out. Silent, final, and with no turning back. 4 years ago, on a bleak autumn afternoon, Lauren came back to my house with red-rimmed eyes, clutching a small bag tightly in her arms. Her marriage had fallen apart faster than I had ever imagined. My daughter, once so strong, who believed she could build a solid home, now had nothing more than a single suitcase of clothes and a divorce agreement. Evelyn, my wife, had passed away 3 years before that, and the insurance money she left was still untouched in our savings account. I had never considered using it for anything other than my daughter's future. That night, I sat with Lauren at the kitchen table, listening to her describe the months of being neglected by a husband who only cared for himself. When she sighed and said she had no idea where to start again, I already knew what I would do. I did not need time to think, nor anyone's advice. I would help her get back on her feet in every way I could. A month later, we signed the contract to buy a house in East Bay, a quiet neighborhood near a park and only a few minutes' walk from the beach. I withdrew $60,000 from Evelyn's insurance to cover the down payment. On the day the keys were handed over, Lauren hugged me tightly, her eyes glistening. "You are the only one I can rely on." Hearing that made every sacrifice feel worth it. From then on, I paid $2,500 a month for the mortgage without fail. Every time the bank notification arrived, I felt relieved knowing she had one less thing to worry about. I also paid for the roof repairs after the first winter storm, $7,200 to replace all the shingles and reinforce the beams. The following spring, when Lauren said she wanted to change the kitchen to make cooking feel more inspiring, I added another $9,500 for a stainless steel set with a double oven. By summer, the paint on the walls had begun to peel, so I hired workers to repaint the entire house, choosing a warm cream color Evelyn had once loved. Finally, I upgraded the electrical system and replaced all the lighting with new LED fixtures, another $4,800. Every time my daughter mentioned a need, I rarely said no. I thought that was what a father was meant to do, make sure his daughter lived in comfort and safety. In the early years, Lauren often called me. Sometimes it was just to tell me about her day at work, to invite me over for dinner. We kept our weekend tradition. I brought fresh seafood from the harbor, she cooked, and we would eat while looking through old photos. Once in a while, she would say something that warmed me. "I don't know what I would do without you, Dad." Then Mark appeared. The first time we met, I stayed open-minded. He was a boat repair technician, younger than Lauren by a few years, smooth-talking and knowing exactly how to make people like him. Lauren laughed more around him, and I was happy she had found joy again. But gradually, the calls became less frequent. The dinner invitations dwindled. When I dropped by unannounced, there were often guests there or they were getting ready to go out. The holidays started to change. The first year Mark was around, we spent Christmas at Lauren's house, but his family was there too. I told myself I just needed to get used to it. The next year, they went on vacation with their family in California, and I got a call saying I could visit after the new year. On my birthday, Lauren stopped by her. Or stopped by briefly, bringing a store-bought cake. I tried not to let it bother me. As long as she was stable, I was willing to step back. But there were signs I could not ignore. One Saturday, I dropped by unexpectedly and heard Mark telling his friends about our house and how he managed the finances to keep it going. He did not mention a single cent of mine. Lauren stayed silent, smiling as if that story were entirely true. I remember one winter afternoon when Lauren called to say the heating system had broken down. I immediately called a technician and paid the full bill of $3,200 without a complaint. The next day, I saw photos of Lauren and Mark on social media, dining at a fancy restaurant, the wine they were drinking costing more than the repair bill. I told myself it was just a coincidence. But those coincidences kept happening, and each time another part of me turned cold. I had never kept score. Evelyn used to tell me, "If you help, do not expect repayment." But I believed in gratitude, in the idea that the person you helped would not intentionally push you to the sidelines. Over the years, I had stepped far enough back to let Lauren build her own life, but stayed close enough to catch her if she stumbled. Until that day. Just one sentence. Dad, do not come. I am not expecting you there. I already have plans with Mark's family. It was not just the rejection of a dinner. It was the period at the end of every effort I had made. The reminder that my place in my daughter's life was now as an outsider. Useful only when support was needed, unnecessary when it was not. That night, I went home and sat at the old oak dining table Evelyn and I once used. The table bore the scratches of knives and forks from years of family gatherings. I looked at the space across from me where Lauren would have sat if things were different. For the first time, I felt my sacrifices were no longer a noble duty. They had become something taken for granted, like the monthly electric bill, paid without thanks. I finished my cold and coffee, leaned back in my chair, and let the thoughts settle in. Maybe it was time to stop. Not because I no longer loved her, but because I needed to protect what remained of my dignity. And I knew if I did not change, no one else was going to change for me. The evening after being turned away from the birthday, I went home, brewed a strong cup of black piped, and set my old laptop on the dining table. The screen lit up, reflecting my face under the warm yellow light, the lines deeper than I remembered. My fingers typed the bank password, a chill sliding down my spine as if I were about to open a journal of my own life, recording the long years of sacrifice. The section for recurring transfers appeared. Every month on the 15th, $2,500 had been automatically deducted from my account to Lauren's bank. I clicked on the transaction history and scrolled down. The first page showed this year's list of payments, numbers as steady as the tick of a clock. 2,500, 2,500, 2,500. I scrolled further. Last year, the year before. The same figure repeating month after month, without a single miss. When I added it all together, the old computer whirred slowly before showing the total. Over $150,000. The number sat there cold and absolute, like proof of a promise I had kept faithfully, but that no longer held any value in their eyes. I took a deep breath and picked up the landline, dialing the bank. The voice of a young woman came on, professional and steady. Thank you for calling West Harbor Bank. This is Melissa. How may I help you today? I want to cancel an automatic transfer immediately. Yes. Could you provide your account number and confirm your details? I read her each number, each answer, my tone even, though inside it felt like the beat of a new drum. Yes, I have located the transaction. This is a monthly transfer of $2,500 to National Bank, account ending in 3847. You have been making this transfer for, she paused briefly, 48 months. That is correct. I want it to stop starting next month. All right, sir, it has been noted. This transfer will be canceled, and the amount will no longer be deducted in the next cycle. A small click sounded in her system, and just like that, I had severed the rope that had bound me for 4 years. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The kitchen was quiet, with only the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of waves. In that moment, it felt as if I had lifted a massive anchor from my boat. The boat might sway, but at least it was free again. The very next day, I began the next step, gathering evidence. I opened the wooden drawer, pulling out every bank statement, the roof repair invoice, the kitchen replacement receipt, the painting contract, and the certificate for the electrical upgrade. The papers were stacked thick and heavy, each sheet like a cross-section of what I had poured in. I dug further into the wooden tool chest and found photos I had taken on my phone. Me standing on Lorna's roof, jeans covered in dust, hammer in hand. I bent over to mow the backyard lawn, me painting the white fence on a summer afternoon. Simple images, but truer than any explanation. At my desk, I divided everything into 15 identical sets. Each set is in a brown folder containing a summary table of every expense I had covered for the house over the past 4 years. Bank statements with every monthly $2,500 transfer highlighted in yellow. Invoices and receipts for each repair and upgrade. Photographs showing the work I had done or supervised personally. As I placed each set in its folder, my hands were steady, without a tremor. This was not an impulsive act of revenge. It was a deliberate preparation, like measuring each plank before building a boat. Everything had to fit perfectly, not a fraction out of line. I stored all the folders in a cardboard box and slid it under the desk, where no one could see at first glance. Every time I bent down, I knew it was there, ready when needed. During all this time, I said nothing to Lauren. When she called, I still picked up, still asked about her work, the weather, or a movie she had seen. But I never mentioned money, never asked about the house. Our conversations were like shallow waters, enough to keep contact but with no deeper current. Sometimes I heard Mark's voice in the background asking, "Who is that?" And Lauren's curt reply, "My dad." Nothing more. I would give a faint smile each time, because I already knew my place in their story. And I also knew that soon, that place was going to change entirely. One Saturday morning, I drove to the harbor, bought a coffee to go, and sat on a wooden bench watching the boats leave. Sunlight shimmered across the water like pieces of precious metal. I thought of Evelyn. If she were still here, would she agree with what I was about to do? I believe she would. Evelyn once told me, "Helping someone to stand is good, but never let them think they can push you down and still have the right to take more." That sentence echoed in my mind like the rhythm of a tide. It steadied me as I pictured Lauren and Mark facing the mortgage on their own. Not because I wished them to suffer, but because I wanted them to learn the value of standing on their own feet. That evening when I came home, I saw a photo on Lauren's Facebook. She and Mark are standing in front of the house, glasses of wine in hand, the caption reading, "Our first home, built with effort and love." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling both bitter and strangely relieved. They had forgotten, or chosen to forget, that the foundation of this love was built on my sweat and my money. But that truth would not be buried forever. I closed my laptop, locked the front door, and went to bed early. In the darkness, I listened to the steady crash of waves beyond the shore. Just like building a new boat, I knew the preparation stage was done. The hardest part, action, was ahead, and I would not rush it because a boat must wait for the right tide to set sail safely. A month after the birthday, when I was shut out, on a quiet Sunday morning, I was sitting by the window with a cup of coffee when a Facebook notification lit up my phone screen. Lauren's new cover photo appeared. She and Mark stood in front of the house, hand in hand, smiling brightly. The bold caption below read, "Housewarming. Our first home we bought and paid for ourselves." Beneath it was an invitation. "We look forward to welcoming all our friends, family, and loved ones next Saturday." I stared at the words "bought and paid for ourselves" longer than necessary. It was not just a boast. To me, it was a punch straight to everything I had silently put in over 4 years. $150,000, the repairs, the scorching summer afternoons when I stood painting the fence, all of it reduced to bought and paid for by a single careless sentence. I scrolled down to check the guest list. Nearly all of Mark's relatives were there, along with a few of Lauren's old school friends and names I had never heard before. I was not on it. No mention, no private message. That was the moment I knew. The time had come. I pictured the cardboard box under my desk, holding 15 neatly organized sets of records, each one an honest account of the 4 years of bought and paid for they had been parading. This time, I would not just be the man outside looking at the golden light spilling from the window. I would walk in, carrying the truth. I spent the week preparing carefully. I had been a boat builder for 35 years. I knew the value of measuring and planning before putting the saw to the wood. I chose the cleanest set of files, straightened every page of statements, and clipped them into a sturdy folder. I polished the leather briefcase I once used for carrying technical blueprints. On Saturday morning, I was the first customer at the dry cleaners on Main Street. My white shirt was pressed crisp with no creases. I chose a dark brown leather jacket, formal enough but still warm for an early June evening with the sea breeze. My leather shoes were polished until they reflected the light. Everything was precise, with no detail out of place. That afternoon, I ate an early dinner, a bowl of clam chowder and bread, then checked my watch. 6:30. I wanted to arrive just as the main course was being served, when everyone would be seated and unable to make an easy excuse to leave. I drove through the East Bay. The road to Lauren's house was lined with maple trees, the golden light spilling from the windows. As I got closer, I saw a car parked along both sides of the street and the sound of laughter drifting from the porch. The house glowed brightly, the front door wide open, the scent of grilled meat and red wine mingling with the damp salt air. I parked across the street and cut the engine. Through the dining room window, I saw Lauren in a navy dress standing beside Mark, holding a glass of wine and chatting with a group of guests. Both were smiling, but their smiles faltered the moment I stepped onto the porch, briefcase in hand. The conversation in the room softened, a few eyes turning toward the door. An older woman tilted her head as if trying to place me. A young man near the window looked me over with curiosity. Lauren spoke first. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I smiled, keeping my tone even. "Hello, sweetheart. I heard tonight was the housewarming. I thought I should come and congratulate you." Mark stepped forward, trying to stay polite, though his eyes betrayed discomfort. "We, didn't know you would be coming." "That's right," I replied, letting my eyes sweep over the table already set with the main course. I wanted to make it a surprise. I walked in. No one stopped me. I set the briefcase down on the buffet table in the corner. A few guests exchanged glances, as if they were watching a scene that wasn't in the script. Lauren came closer, lowering her tone. "Dad, this isn't the time." I cut her off gently. "Don't worry, I won't be staying long. I just brought a gift." I opened the briefcase, pulled out one folder, then another, then a third, until the table was covered in brown folders. The room grew quiet. "Here," I said, my voice clear but not loud, "is the real history of this house. Bank statements, repair invoices, photos of the days I climbed the roof myself and painted the fence myself." An older woman with silver hair sitting near the door opened the folder in front of her. Her expression shifted quickly from curiosity to astonishment. Beside her, a middle-aged man raised his eyebrows as he flipped through pages marked with the steady monthly figure of $2,500. "You paid all of this?" the man asked. I nodded. 4 years, not a single month missed. And that's not counting the $60,000 down payment at the start. Lauren's cheeks flushed, and Mark shifted uncomfortably. A young guest whispered, "But on Facebook they said..." I looked directly at Lauren and Mark. They said we bought and paid for ourselves. And tonight, in front of friends and family, I think the truth deserves to be known. The air in the room thickened. The faint clink of cutlery on plates stopped entirely. A few people set their wine glasses down, waiting for what would come next. "I am not here to argue," I continued, "but when you are cut out of the dinner table while still paying for that very table, it's time to put an end to it." Lauren stammered, "Dad, I was going to tell everyone." "No need," I interrupted. "The papers have already spoken for you." I handed out the remaining folders, then picked up my now empty briefcase. Looking around, I caught some eyes that turned away and others that met mine with silent respect. The murmurs began to ripple down the table. A middle-aged man wearing black-rimmed glasses looked up. So, her father paid for almost all of this. Her hand tightened around the wine glass, her eyes fixed on her plate. Mark sat beside her, the polite smile gone, replaced with a visible tension. A silver-haired woman wearing a pearl necklace flipped through a few more pages of the folder in front of her. She looked at Lauren with an expression tinged with disappointment. "Lauren, is this true?" Lauren drew in a deep breath, struggling to keep her voice steady. "He helped, but..." Mark cut in, his voice edged with irritation. "But this is a family matter, not something to bring out in the middle of dinner in front of everyone." I turned slightly toward him, my eyes locked on his. Family. I was cut out of my daughter's birthday, left off the guest list for the housewarming, while still paying for the dinner and the very table everyone here is sitting around. You call that family? The air in the room thickened. The sound of cutlery against plates stopped completely. Some guests exchanged glances, others quietly pushed back their chairs, preparing to leave. A young man who looked like one of Mark's cousins spoke up. "On Facebook, you two said we bought and paid for ourselves." I looked directly at Lauren. "I think you should explain to them what bought and paid for means when most of the payments came from your father's account." Lauren's cheeks flushed red. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was part protection, part control. "You are ruining our evening," Mark said, his voice low but unable to hide the anger. No, I replied. I am just giving it back to the truth. I turned to the people still in the room. I do not want this to be misunderstood. I helped because I thought we were family. I never expected repayment, but I will not accept being erased from the story, with everything I did treated as if it never existed. A young woman who seemed to be one of Lauren's colleagues exhaled softly and closed the folder. I had no idea about this. I nodded. Most people didn't, because I stayed silent, but silence has its limits. Mark lifted his chin. You could have talked to us about this privately. I've been talking privately for 4 years, I answered, my tone unchanged. The result was being shut out. Tonight, I chose to speak in front of everyone so the truth would no longer be twisted. Some guests began to stand. The atmosphere was heavy, like the air had lost its oxygen. A middle-aged couple quietly slipped out the door, avoiding Lauren's gaze. I gathered my eyes back, not prolonging it further. I knew I had said enough. There was no need to shout, no need to accuse further. The evidence had already done its work. I picked up my now empty briefcase and gave a slight nod. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. This will be the last time I pay for this meal. I turned and walked out. Behind me, the sound of chairs scraping, hushed voices, and questions began to mix. The undercurrent I had stirred would continue to churn in that house long after I had stepped out the door. As I descended the porch steps, the night sea breeze slipped into my collar, salty and cold. But to me, it felt like a wind of release. I knew that from that moment on, my place in their story had changed forever. And this time, I was the one who decided it. I did not leave the party immediately after handing out the folders. I stayed in the corner of the living room, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, watching the averted eyes, the murmurs blending with music that had been turned down without anyone noticing. Lauren kept trying to smile, while Mark kept looking at me as if he wanted to rip apart every sheet of paper in the guest's hands. I said nothing more. Silence, for me, was already heavy enough to blanket that entire room. As I left, I saw Mark standing on the porch, his hands in his pockets, his chin tilted slightly upward in a gesture that felt like a warning. I did not stop. I simply gave a slight nod and walked past him. Some confrontations do not require words. They only require time to do their work. That night, around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Lauren. I hesitated a few seconds before answering. Dad. Her voice was small, as if she were trying to hold herself together. About today. I just wanted to ask, could you tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, just so I can save face for me and for Mark? I looked out the window where the street lights reflected on puddles left by the evening rain. My answer had been ready in my mind long before that party even began. The truth does not need to be adjusted, Lauren. It stands on its own. Silence on the other end. I heard a faint sigh, then the click of the line disconnecting. No apology, no further explanation. A week later, I got word that Mark had moved out. Lauren's neighbor, Mrs. Edna, called just to tell me that morning she saw a pickup truck parked out front, Mark carrying out boxes and slamming the door shut. Lauren stood on the porch, arms crossed, not crying. Edna's voice was part sympathy, part curiosity, but I only said, all right, and thanked her before hanging up. I knew that for Mark, that party was a direct blow to his pride, and for Lauren, it was the first crack between them. A crack I did not create, only made visible. The following month, on a Monday morning, I went to the post office to collect my mail and found a pale yellow envelope in my box. Bold red letters on the front read, Notice. It was a late mortgage payment notice, sent to me by mistake because I was still listed as a secondary contact on the loan. I stood right there at the counter, opening it and reading every line. The overdue amount was not small, and I knew this was only the first month since I had stopped paying. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Lauren. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A while later, she called again. I did not answer. A text came in. Dad, I need to talk. Call me when you can. Read it, but did not reply. 3 days later, another text. I know I was wrong, but I need your help, just for this month. I still did not reply. I sat in my small kitchen, holding a cup of black coffee, listening to the sound of waves from the harbor. I thought back to the early days after Lauren's divorce, her gaunt face, her eyes swollen from crying. and how I had promised myself I would be her only anchor. I had kept that promise for 4 years until I realized she had learned to treat my sacrifice as something automatic. Mark might have left, but the habit of leaning on me and dismissing my presence was still there. I understood that if I paid this amount now, everything would go back to the way it was, and eventually, I would once again be cut out of another important moment in her life. One evening while watching the news, my landline rang. This time it was an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a man's voice introduced himself as a debt collector from the bank. He asked if I could help Lauren, since I had once been the co-signer on the loan. I told him plainly that I had stopped all payments the previous month and would not resume. He was silent for a few seconds and then simply said, "Thank you," and hung up. I did not feel joy in saying that, but I did feel lighter. Not because I wanted my daughter to fail, but because I wanted her to learn that every choice comes with its own cost. That weekend, I drove past Lauren's neighborhood. From a distance, I saw the front yard overgrown with weeds, the mailbox stuffed with unopened mail, the curtains drawn tight. No sign of anyone home. I did not stop, only slowed down long enough to take in the image. A few days later, Mrs. Edna called again. She told me Lauren had gone to Mark's mother's house in Salem to take a break. I only said, "All right," and wished her a good day. I knew the real storm for Lauren was only just beginning. And I also knew that this time I would not step in to shield her like before. My silence was not abandonment. It was the only way to make her stand on her own 2 feet. Since I stopped paying Lauren's mortgage, my bank account, for the first time in years, no longer showed that automatic deduction at the start of the month. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the number on my computer screen, and it hit me how much I had sacrificed without ever keeping count. Over $150,000 in exchange for nothing more than a place on the margins of my own daughter's life. I decided not to let the savings I had left just sit there, waiting as a reserve for the next desperate phone call. I wanted it to serve me for the years I still had the strength to work and the ability to enjoy them. One morning in late April, I stopped by the old boatyard in the south of town. It was a small wooden boat workshop with red brick walls and a faded tin roof, once owned by my friend Jim, someone I had worked with at the shipyard when we were both in our early 20s. Jim had passed away last year, and the shop had been empty ever since. I stood in front of the peeling green door, breathing in the smell of old wood and tar, and I knew instantly I wanted to belong here again. It took only 3 weeks to finalize the purchase. On the day I got the keys, I stepped inside, the hinges creaking like an old friend's greeting. Sunlight poured through dust-frosted windows, striking a wooden floor marked with footprints and saw cuts from decades past. I didn't see a place in need of repair. I saw a place waiting to be brought back to life. I began cleaning, replacing broken panes, and repainting door frames. The workbenches, tool racks, and hand drills were set neatly in place. On the wall, I hung a few old photos. Jim and I standing beside the first sailboat we ever built together, a crew of young shipwrights smiling wide as we launched a vessel into the water. A month later, I started teaching boat building to local young people. The tuition wasn't much, sometimes just a few hours of help around the shop, or a bag of fresh-caught fish from an early morning trip. What I wanted to pass on was not just a skill, but something that had been fading from the younger generation. Patience, steady hands, and the pride of seeing a finished boat glide across the water. Summer mornings were filled with the sound of planes smoothing wood, the thud of chisels, and bursts of laughter. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway watching my students argue over how to set the keel, and it felt like stepping 30 years back in time. By July, I was joining old friends on summer sailing trips, traveling along the coast and into small coves reachable only by water. In the evenings, we'd drop anchor, light a fire, grill fish, and drink cold beer. My body felt stronger, my sleep deeper. The weight of family troubles lifted, replaced by a strange and welcome lightness. For my 61st birthday, I decided to host a small party at the workshop. I handwrote invitations to friends, students, and a few close neighbors. That morning, I strung lanterns, laid a red checkered cloth over the long table in the center of the shop, and set out pastries, cured meats, and hot coffee. People arrived early, filling the space once cold and empty with warmth and laughter. The kids brought small wooden boat models, their first projects, to give me. I took each one, examined it closely, and placed it on the wooden shelf by the window where the morning sun could shine on it. Midway through the party, a student named Evan raised his glass and said, "I don't know what I would be doing if I hadn't met you. You didn't just teach me how to build boats, you taught me patience and how to keep promises to myself." I didn't answer right away, just patted his shoulder. Sometimes the most genuine thanks doesn't need many words. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at the table, the golden light falling on the freshly polished floorboards. I thought about the past years, the money sent without question, the calls that came only for small talk, and realized I no longer felt lonely. I had filled that space with the laughter of friends, the steady hum of tools, and the sight of boats taking shape day by day. I didn't know where Lauren was or if Mark had returned, but I knew one thing clearly. My life no longer revolved around waiting for someone to open their door to me. No, to me. I had opened another door myself, stepped through it, and found a new home. Not built of brick and mortar, but of wood, the sea, and people who truly wanted to stay. That autumn, the maple leaves at the harbor turned a brilliant red. In the mornings, a thin mist lay over the water like a veil, and the cry of gulls echoed from far away. I was in the workshop, planning the last board for a small sailboat commissioned in the summer, when I heard a knock at the door. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out. Lauren was standing there. She wore a thin gray coat, her hair pulled back neatly, her face more drawn than the last time I saw her. The proud look in her eyes was gone, replaced by the weariness of someone who had lost more than just a house. "Dad," she began, her voice so soft it seemed she didn't want to hear it herself. "I lost the house." I stayed silent, letting her continue. She told me that after Mark left, everything quickly unraveled. She had tried to manage, but the mortgage was too high, her income too small. In the end, the bank took the house. Now she was renting a small apartment in the suburbs, working a temporary job, and living a life that looked nothing like the housewarming photos she had once posted online. She looked down and added, "I know. What I did hurt you. I'm sorry, I don't expect you to forget, but can we start over?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Behind her, yellow leaves were falling one by one along the narrow road to the harbor. In that moment, I saw her as a child again, clutching the mooring rope, eyes shining the first time she went sailing with me. Time and poor choices had changed a great deal, but she was still my daughter. I nodded. "I forgive you, but I will never pay a mortgage again." Lauren bit her lip, then nodded. I knew she understood. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate, as if I wanted to etch them into her memory. "You can repair a house, but when the foundation of respect has collapsed, it will never be steady again." She didn't argue, and she didn't cry. We stood there listening to the sea wind slip through the doorframe, carrying the scent of salt and damp wood. Then she said goodbye and turned away. I watched until she disappeared behind the trees. That afternoon, I returned to the boat in the workshop. It was a small sailboat, a walnut hull edged with treated pine. Every plane stroke, every coat of varnish had been done by hand. When I fixed the white sail to the mast, the late golden light poured through the fabric, making the whole workshop glow. 3 days later, I launched the new boat into the bay. The sky was still dark, lit only by the yellow lamps of the harbor reflecting off the still water. I tied the lines, checked everything once more, and pushed off. As the sail filled with wind and the bow cut through calm water, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. The sun began to rise on the horizon, casting pink and amber light across the sea. I stood at the bow, breathing in the scent of salt and new wood, listening to the waves tapping gently against the hull like a slow, steady heartbeat. No more phones ringing endlessly. No more midnight messages asking for money. No more standing at the threshold of someone else's life, waiting for the door to open. I had found peace here, among the sea, the wind, and the boats built by my own hands. And I knew that from now on, every foundation in my life would be built from the only thing that could hold firm: respect for myself. If you have ever reached the moment when you realize you have given too much without receiving respect in return, remember this: silence and boundaries are the two greatest gifts you can give yourself. Share your story in the comments and subscribe to hear more journeys of those who were once pushed to the margins, but came back stronger than ever.